Welcome to the Nordic Mythology podcast. I'm Daniel Farrand, owner of the company Horns of Odin. And before we start today's show, I have to do a little bit of housekeeping, and that is, as always, just to plug our Patreon. It's the way we keep the lights on. It's the way we pay the people that help out behind the scenes, like Rowan, Bob, Alyssa. They do a lot of work. And for that, you can join us for £3 a month, which is 10p a day, and you're going to get a bonus episode every week where we do a live Q&A with the guests. You can submit your questions before or during or after the episode. You can watch them live as well. There's also a live chat that goes on during the episodes, which is always a lot of fun. It's like a side quest to the main episode. You also get our Discord server, which is also, again, a little community over there. There's a lot of lovely people we've collected over the years. And for the tier above that, you get the Storytime episodes with myself and Jonas Lorentzen, where we read through a different saga. We've started to simplify these a little bit and make them a little easier to digest, so they're a tad more fun. We found that a lot of the original sagas kind of dragged on a little bit, to say the least, and had a lot of the same names for very similar people, and became very difficult for us to dissect. So yeah, we simplified that. Like I said, they're getting a little bit more simple, and they're a lot of fun. If you haven't checked those out, you get the whole back catalogue on there. But let's jump into the episode. So we have two returning guests. Obviously, one is a big welcome back. We haven't had him on for a while, and that's Dr. Mathias Nordvig. I'm going to throw that in there. Obviously, Jameson Foster was on a couple of weeks ago, and then his first time appearing is Andrew Munz. Is that right? Did I pronounce that right, Andrew? I didn't check with you.
Yeah, that's great.
Perfect. Wonderful. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you for having us.
So, yeah, Matthias, it's lovely to see you again. I was saying how I felt nervous because you were there watching. I don't know. For some reason, my legs stayed stiff the whole time I read that introduction. It was like out of a nerve thing that my leg just was like shot out at like this angle. I'm just stuck like that, so I can relax a little bit now. You still put a few God in me.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's great to be back, but since I'm making you so nervous, I don't know how I feel about it.
No, it's good. It's just like when the teacher sits in, I guess.
That's why I am the teacher.
Well, I mean, technically, you are literally.
Yeah, that is something I do, I guess.
We all need somebody among us who can be that person to say, actually.
Yes.
Yeah,
Right.
Yeah, I had
That
like
guy.
good for us. I had way over 100 episodes of that.
That's true. Yeah.
All documented for public.
Yeah, we had a lot of. But we're here to talk about Saga, the musical, which, Andrew, I assume is your brainchild, and then you brought these two lovely gentlemen along for the journey.
Yes, indeed. It was something small that I had. Well, small, but it was just a project, just a kind of an idea for a project at the time, and for quite a few years, and it started to kind of come into fruition where I knew it was going to be happening this fall. I knew we were going to pull the trigger on this idea, but I didn't have a composer. I didn't have much support at that, then, and I had attended a Viking tattoo talk that Matthias was participating in over in Victor, Idaho, which is about 20 miles from here. And I'm in Jackson, Wyoming. And I went to go to that, and I was so excited to actually meet Matthias because I have kind of an affinity for collecting books, as you can see from behind me, and pretty much anything that has to do with Iceland specifically, I scoop up and gather. And I had a copy of the Matthias's book. Here's a little advertising for you: Volcanoes in Old Norse Mythology. Myth and Environment in Early Iceland. And that book actually informed some ideas for my show that weren't fully formed at the time. And so I got in touch with Matthias. I went to the talk, we chatted, and we just started, becoming friends in that respect. I hope that's okay for me to say that we're friends, Matthias.
It's okay. Yeah.
And then
Can you imagine if you'd just been like, no?
Yeah, it's just like
We're doing the
I
musical.
don't.
No.
When did we meet? I don't remember.
Who are you again?
Yeah.
What am I doing here?
And then it was fortunately Matthias scooped Jameson into this crazy little sundae that we were making, and the three of us started just kind of chatting about this idea. I told Jameson what I was hoping for music. Matthias helped with some story elements and some accuracy. And that is kind of like the very basic gist of how the Three Stooges came together for this crazy little thing.
So did you do musicals before? Did you have like a background in that?
Yeah, so I've written a few. I do a lot of comedy and stand-up, and my background is in improv and also musical theater. And I wanted to. I had done musicals in the past, a lot of satire things, but I'd never done anything dramatic. It was really important for me to create something that felt very much my voice, and also my interest, but also something that felt very epic in scale and epic in its nature. And so I utilized so much of my own education and experience over the years and siphoned that through this Icelandic sieve and put together this show that still has many elements of how a traditional musical is structured, but it also does its own unique things. It's not all completely dramatic. It does have some comedy within it, but it is a musical where all of the dialogue is in English and all of the lyrics are in Icelandic and Old Norse, which was a challenge.
Okay. Does that take away from the experience in any way? Just, I guess, because typically I'm not a huge musical goer, but usually part of the story is told through the song as much as it is the spoken word.
Right. And I am probably right there with you in terms of not always a huge embracer of traditional musicals. I think they can be corny. They can be, you can kind of be invested in the scene and then the piano starts again and you're just like, oh my God, another song. And it just gets so overwhelming. And there's just too many people on stage, too many harmonies, too much like love, beautiful things just happening. It's all like designed to like, pull on this heartstring. And so when I went into writing Saga, I knew that I wanted to like you say, tell this story through music. But it's not in total, there's about 7-8 songs within this 90-minute show. But not, I think only maybe 1 or 2 of the songs like are close to the 3-minute mark. Okay. Everything else is a bit shorter, but that's only because we are incorporating, and Jameson, you can speak more on this about that we are incorporating more chanting elements, more just kind of repetitive, prayer style singing, and then it gets more melodic kind of as the show goes on. It starts off with a very intense, sacrifice scene, a blot, and it ends with this like very joyous settlement song when when Reykjavik is founded, so it's even though the lyrics are in Icelandic, I think, or Old Norse, the audience. What we're doing with our actors is really trying to help them understand why they're singing what they're singing about, because there's nothing that's super esoteric. Nobody gets like incredibly poetic about what they're singing about. They are singing for the mood of the scene, and there will be a translation guide for audience members when they come see the show that they can look at and see what they're singing about. But my hope is that audience members come to this show, sit down, experience the show as it is, because I think a lot of American audiences have no concept of what Old Norse or Icelandic sound like. And so I really just want them to get away from this idea that everything must be translated, I must have the super titles above the opera, just experience the language, experience the reality of what's happening on stage, and you'll understand more than you expect.
Yeah, Jameson, so I guess that's a task for you to make people understand this language that they for all intents and purposes aren't going to understand, but you've got to try and get the meaning of the song across.
Yeah, so what I found that the music, one of the main purposes of the music is to set like a particularly Nordic mood, because one of the parts of it being in English, right, is I think people can get immersed into the play and forget they're in Iceland from time to time, especially ancient Iceland. And so the music is interspersed with a combination of what is historically Nordic, but also what is the kind of Nordic that people would expect from a Nordic musical, right? So it's striking this balance between historical accuracy, but also something that will relate to what people want today in their art experience. So what I found is that the music has, at least what I hope that it does, is adds a lot to the atmosphere and the mood to reestablish through not only the music, but the fact that it's in, Old Norse and Icelandic. The music is interspersed out to be like, yeah, we're in Iceland, in case you've forgotten. So that's at least what one of the goals that I've had has been, is to just create a typically or expectedly Icelandic or Nordic mood through the music, either through historical accuracy or through what people want out of a Nordic setting today.
Yeah, because I guess this is going to play in Jacksonville. Jackson,
Wyoming.
Jackson.
Yeah.
Me and my American place names. Don't trust me.
That's fine.
So Jackson, Wyoming. Yeah, so I guess
just you have Bill to the end of it.
Yeah, I just went for it. Like it's a British thing.
Yeah, it's all good.
Jacksonshire.
Yeah.
So you have to take people in 2023 in Jackson and try and put them in Iceland.
874.
In 874, but also while speaking English. How do you plan on because I assume you don't have like a huge budget for tons of props and things that I guess would pull people in?
We don't have a huge budget, but I'm a very resourceful kind of producer and director, and I always say that my plays are held together by duct tape and a dream. And
that's like my life,
is the case. Yeah,
mine too.
Yeah.
I'm stealing that, Andy.
Yeah, please. Just pay me. So we will have the concept of what we're doing, and I'm very fortunate, and the reason why we are doing this ambitious, very strange, show that isn't just like guys and dolls, let's sell some tickets, we're really kind of taking a massive leap with this, because I recently took over a theater right here in Jackson. It's called the Pink Garter Theater. It's just off the town square. It was built in, the late 60s, opened in 1970, and COVID had shut it down. And so it kind of remained dormant. The building sold, they were looking for tenants, and I jumped up and I said, all right, this is what I'm going to do. And so I started a nonprofit called Tumbleweed Creative Arts. And that whole focus of that organization is to empower local artists within our community, and basically tell them that, if you have a big idea, if you want to create something like an Icelandic musical or a French cabaret of some sort, and we want to host it in that space, this is where those dreams will kind of like be fostered and created, and we will help find funding through the nonprofit to actually make those dreams a reality. And Saga is our first big show since we established the nonprofit earlier this spring. And we do have a bit of a budget. I did kind of put on a big successful show this past May that helped kind of jumpstart this organization. And so we got a ton of this like insulation foam, like kind of like foam sheeting that was donated to us, that was scrap from another artistic project that an artist was working on in town. And so we ended up just getting piles of this stuff, and our brains, me and my team, our brains just started to really click and be like, oh my gosh, we can make a Viking ship out of this. We can make panels for like backdrops. We can make a volcano. We can make all of these things.
Oh, Matthias will bloody love that, won't he?
Yeah.
Those volcanoes.
Yeah. And so we are really taking a big step forward by transforming this audience chamber, because it's ours now, because we are leasing the space. We can really make the decisions on what we are taking away or adding into our audience. And we have these 2 balconies that are just over the like sides of the stage. They used to have railings on them. Now we're turning them into cliff sides, and we're like having there's even a moment when we talk about the Westman Islands, the moment where Ingolfor, and I guess we'll talk more about the story in a bit, but where, our main character goes to get revenge on the death of his foster brother, and the Westman Islands are named for these, Irish slaves who kind of escaped there and threw themselves from the cliffs. And so I really was like, we need to figure out how to throw somebody from a cliff in this show. And so we've created, a catch net system that is like removable and safe, and are working with actors on like how to like throw themselves off a balcony. So in terms of ambition, what's great is that this is not just like, making, runes out of cardboard and just kind of dancing around the stage with horns on our helmets. But we're definitely leaning more.
I know you said now that it's yours, you can kind of do what you want. That doesn't mean you have to do everything, like throw your actors off balconies.
But why not?
If they're willing. Matthias, I guess you're predominantly there for the historical accuracy. How, or you and Andrew together, how do you keep it entertaining whilst maintaining the accuracy? Because obviously we got sent to see a very popular movie a few years ago, The Northman. And as much as I enjoyed it, I think that for the layperson, it became very complex and a bit overcomplicated and over accurate in areas, really trying to do justice to the time period, which is wonderful, but it becomes, or can very quickly become, stale and boring for people who aren't super into this stuff. So how do you tackle that?
Well, to me, it's about finding a balance between this thing we call historical accuracy, which is a complicated conversation. What does it mean to say that?
There he is. There he is.
It's complicated. Keeping a balance between that and then the creative genius that would be Andy. Right. So the way that I see the role of sort of like doing this sort of historical consultancy is more to help furnish the creative ideas, and knowing what elements to pick out, for instance, come up with suggestions. When a layperson or a person who knows a little bit about Old Norse stuff, history, all of these things, they want to create something, right? They can then talk to me about, well, how do I do that in context of all of this material we have out there, right? Because I've spent so much of my life reading sagas and literature from medieval Iceland and medieval Scandinavia, and it would usually be a situation of like, you know what, I know exactly this story that could be useful for that, and that could help you kickstart the creative process, or there's a detail over here, or there's like an archaeological fact from this location, those kinds of things, right? And then it comes down to the person creating the story, right? What elements they want to use, how much of it they want to use it, and what are they focused on in terms of creating a sense of authenticity in their play, in their book, in their movie, whatever it is, right? In their song. And that, I think, that's where I, as a historical consultant, just unleash them, right, and say this is your creative project here. You can take the information and use it however you want. Just don't put horns on somebody's helmet.
But I guess to a degree, obviously, when you've got your name on it, you also can't wildly go. I guess you can give your advice, but then Andrew, like, it could put horns on somebody's helmets or whatever, but your name is kind of attached to it. So then when it comes out, even though you've given the accurate advice, people, I guess, could still be like, oh, well, Mathias has advised on this. Maybe it's true or real. I don't know.
I mean, what we should always understand is that we're modern human beings living in this particular historical moment, interpreting the past, and we do that on different levels based on the information that we have available to us. Scholars, they, in so many ways, give qualified guesses to what that past looked like. If we go back to the 870s, we have so very little material to actually understand what the culture looked like in Iceland. The composition of the people themselves, like where did they come from? We got some genetic analysis of skeletons that tells us there was a considerable portion of people who came from the British Isles and Ireland. And then, fast forward a couple of centuries, and the historians in Iceland, they're sort of representing the whole thing as like everybody came from Norway. So what do we have there? Well, we have a discrepancy between the historical reality in the 800s and what later authors of literature in medieval Iceland are saying. That's the kind of information I can give you. And then you can take that and do with it what you want, right? I can, of course, also then, make interpretations of like what happened. Why is that a situation? My interpretation of that is that there was some kind of like what do you call it? A low-key kind of genocidal situation going on in early Icelandic history, where the Gaelic population was slowly weeded out by being denied access to resources, access to marriages, all those kinds of things, right? But that's my interpretation of the historical situation. We don't have good sources to really help us fully understand what happened, right? That's just an example, and you can use anything, any subject from that period to rant forever about how you would like to interpret it, as I'm good at, right?
So I guess then to throw that over to you, Andrew, as the writer, because as I touched on in the plugs before the podcast started, and if you skipped over the plugs, then I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed in you, because I'm going to throw back to it now, where I was saying me and Jonas have been doing a story time episodes where we read different sagas, and we've got caught up trying to read the most accurate one that we can find, the oldest version of it, and then we just a week in go, oh fuck, everyone's got the same name, this story's going on for ages, it's telling us about a bunch of people here that are not related to the story, it goes on a whole lineage tangent, and it's all this stuff thrown in there that's just not needed, because it was never written to be super entertaining, I guess, in a modern sense. So how do you find that of everything that Mathias gives you when it comes to accurate information, but then weaving it into this entertaining story
Mm-hmm. Well, what I did was because we are adapting the settlement story of Iceland as featured in Landnámabók, and that story itself is fairly sparse in details. I mean, as you know, with a lot of sagas, there is a lot of kind of mental filling in of gaps that is required of a reader, especially if the names are becoming, burdensome to, figure out, are we talking about that, Gisli or this Gisli or like, this, Aethor, son of, Atni or whatever it is. There are a lot of elements that, get kind of dropped that drop away that would normally help really inform a very, good, well written narrative. And so with Landnámabók, because that story is so small, it is not, it's not in the length of a normal Icelandic saga as we see them, or some of like the more epic ones that we see as kind of the staples like Njal Saga and whatnot. This is a story that is one of many other settlement stories within Landnámabók, and it's not the very first time anybody comes to Iceland, and it is certainly, not the reason other people come. It is Ingólfur Arnason is given the title of the first permanent settler of Iceland because, in truth, this is the only resource that we have, or at least like the only one that really kind of says he came here at this time with these people for this reason and stayed. There are other mentions of Ingólfur and Hjörleifur, his foster brother, or second cousin, also that appear in one or two other stories, I think. But in truth, this is really the most narrative that we have of Ingólfur. And so with that, I really looked at how modern day Icelanders look at their settlement story. And I was actually really shocked to learn that it has never actually been dramatized in a big way. We in the United States have countless actors who have portrayed people like George Washington, and like, our, 200-year history is so important to us. And here Iceland has this, 1,000-year history that is, very, very complex and dense and full of very interesting humans that have existed. And yet there is no like big biopic of Ingólfur Arnason. There's no like, well-known novel that like tells that full story. And so it was a real challenge that I welcomed, to look at this story and say, who are the main players here and what do they represent? As a playwright, it's important for me to create scenes, right? I need to really kind of pick and choose which elements of this story will make for good narrative. And so right out of the gate, we actually don't start in 874. We start in 1702. With Árni Magnússon, manuscript collector, scholar, who created a census for the King of Denmark and traveled around Iceland collecting manuscripts, vellum, leaflets, letters, and things like that, that ultimately would become the Árni Magnússon collection, and him being the very reason why we have so many great, actual primary resources of the sagas. And so in that prologue, he actually arrives at a woman's house in East Iceland and is collecting his census. And she says, "Oh yeah, I have something here somewhere." And she starts telling him about her ancestry, which, if anybody has been to Iceland, people love to talk about how they're related to one of the first 5 families of Iceland, of like who settled here and whatnot. Everybody's related. Everything goes back. And so she starts talking about how she is like the great granddaughter of Helga Arnardóttir, who is the sister, the blood sister of Ingólfur. And and this saga that she has to give Árni Magnusson is actually a blank book, and she's going to actually vocalize and tell him this story of the settlement from the way that her family has passed down the story to her. And so that is kind of the creative element that I allow myself for telling this settlement story, is that it's actually from the perspective of a farmer woman in the 1700s. Mm-hmm. And we still touch on so many of the things that are mentioned in Landnáma book, but it allows me to make some creative decisions, including with the female characters, because as we know, there's not a ton of female heroes or female stories within the sagas. And it allows me to create more of a complex and rich narrative, while still adhering to the Landnáma book, the source material, but also the spirit of what sagas were and how stories were shared. And, yes, these clergymen wrote them down, and they've been, documented in these things that can be considered a little dry and full of names that we can't remember. But ultimately, the stories themselves are very, very, they're very sweeping. They're very, some of them are very romantic. Some of them are very intense and horrific. And so I really wanted to just honor that whole history with this one story. And that's why it's not called Ingólfur Saga or like the founding of Iceland. It is just called Saga. And, and so we have a lot of fun within that. And Mathias, of course, was so helpful in kind of helping, like recognizing what I was trying to do, but also honoring what the accuracy of what we do know, and making sure that what we do know is implanted within that story.
Mm-hmm. And if I can add something to this, this, like Ari Þorkelsson, who presumably wrote Landnáma book, I mean, he kind of did the same thing. Right. So these little short stories, 400 and something that are recorded there in that book about the first settlers, they probably come from some oral storytelling culture that probably existed at the Alþingi, the General Assembly, right? So Ari, he would go to the General Assembly, just like everybody else who was a somewhat important figure in Iceland at the time. And he would spend time with all of these chieftains and their retinue from different parts of Iceland. And that's where he would have heard these stories probably, right? And so then he goes back to Otti, I think it is, where he's writing and learning. And then he writes these stories down. And one of the things that you can see is also both in Landnáma book and in Íslendinga book, the book of Icelanders that he also wrote, is that he uses his scholarly knowledge. The learning that he gets from books from the continent, he uses this knowledge to calibrate dates. For instance, we can count the ancestry of this particular person who told me this particular story about their settler back to so and so, which was around the same time where Harald the Harfagri ruled in Norway, which was around the same time where this and that king ruled in England. So that would have been so and so many years since the birth of Christ, right? That's how he's working, right? So he's contextualizing these oral narratives that in and of themselves are kind of timeless otherwise. The families themselves perhaps didn't care too much about trying to figure out exactly what year the settlement of their family happened in Iceland. But he did, because he's a learned scholar who is working within the framework of the history that's designed by the church of the time, right?
What year was it written? What year was it written down?
Landnáma book.
Yes.
1120, we say. We're not entirely sure, but around that time.
there's a good distance between the actual settlement of Iceland. And
Yeah.
so how accurate do you think that his telling is, Mathias? And I guess because for most, I would say maybe not for most people listening to this, but for most people who have a vague interest in this world, probably will take their settlement of Iceland from Vikings, the TV show, and Floki and his journey over there and kind of settling. And the whole idea of Floki finding Iceland doesn't just come from the TV show. That is something that's floated around.
It comes from Ari.
Yes. So what do we know for certain, and what can we kind of?
So it's complicated. Well, so we don't know much for certain, right? So the Ari writes the story about Ingólfur's settlement. And then, what was it, back in the 90s or so, in downtown Reykjavik, they're digging out for a new building, and they find a house that can then be accurately dated to 872 plus 1 or 2 years, because of an ash layer on the structure. And so that to people confirms that Ari's dating of the settlement is accurate, right? So that's something that feeds into the story as like, oh, this is actually a true story, because the years align, right? Then, what was it, 4 years ago or so, archaeologists are excavating a location in Stöðvarfjörður on the eastern side of Iceland, and they find out that the location can be dated to the beginning of the 800s, so 70 years before. And then all of a sudden we're in a situation where it's like, oh, wait a minute, there was somebody living over there 70 years before. Our historical sources say that people first started to fully settle Iceland, and that all just like complicates the matter. Like, so how are we supposed to understand Ari's story? Well, we're supposed to understand Ari's story not as what we would call history today. We're supposed to understand it more in terms of myth, like what we would call myth today. Okay. I personally don't like that terminology, because ultimately it sets up a sort of like a hierarchical relationship between stories, saying that the quote unquote historical information is more accurate than quote unquote mythical information. That's just not how it works, right? Humans put their knowledge of the past into a context that is informed by their present, right? And so when we, for instance, have the story about Hrafnafloki, that is a story that mirrors Noah on his ark and sending out the pigeons or doves or whatever it is to find land, right? Mm-hmm. Here we have sort of like the Viking version of it, where it's ravens instead. And anybody who's well versed in the literature that Ari would be well versed in knows that, right? Mm-hmm. And that's something that scholars have pointed out for decades at least. So that's how he's constructing a story of Iceland. And now Andy has constructed a new story of Iceland, and that becomes part of the storytelling of the settlement of Iceland, hopefully.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think just in regards to this idea of fact versus myth, in a really cool way, there is that parallel with music, right, Jameson? Like the idea that what instruments would have been brought along, on these Viking ships, across the sea. And in truth, it's not much.
Yeah. Sorry. So what I was thinking of this whole time we've been talking about, myth versus history, which is essentially how I would summarize the last bit of conversation, is essentially, Andy, what we experienced going through the St. Magnus hymn, mm-hmm. the Nobilis Humilis.
Mhm.
where so the way that I have gone about making sure that the music, the historical side, is not messing around, I'm trying to get as historical as possible, is actually go back to the earliest written music we have from the Nordics. And just like Landnámabók was just from the 12th century, the earliest bit of written music we have is from the 13th century. So just a little bit after Landnámabók. And that is a hymn written by a monk that was traveling through the Orkney Islands, written for Saint Magnus. It's also known as Nobilis Humilis. And also, as a fun fact, this is the earliest bit of music we have written down in the entirety of European history that is harmonized. So it's more than one note at the same time. So that's just a little bit of a fun fact that, at least as history stands, Norwegians came up with written harmony. But the problem is that when I sent my transcription and little MIDI file to Andy, he was like, "This sounds a little churchy," and I was like, "Well, yeah, it does, because it's a church hymn, right?"
Mm-hmm.
But even though the melody is accurate, it's not serving the mood or atmosphere that's trying to be portrayed in the play and in the narrative. And to me, it's more important that the music does serve the mood and the narrative, rather than it being as historically accurate as possible. So what we did is, Andy asked me, well, could you take the melody but just harmonize it in a different way that doesn't make it sound so churchy? And so I went through a few times, and I finally sent one to him. And according to Andy, it fit the mood perfectly while still retaining that basic melody. So that was a way musically where I had to sort of wrestle with being historically accurate, but also serving the narrative and the story that Andy is trying to tell. So even though I go back to what's historically accurate, it doesn't serve the narrative well, because it does sound very like early Gregorian chants, like the type of stuff that grandma would have had playing on the radio, or what she would have had on CD, right? So in a lot of ways, the St. Magnus hymn that we've arranged for this play has kind of been my favorite experience, rather than the music that I've written down originally, because I think that it's like a pretty poetic vignette of how to wrestle with historical accuracy versus something that serves the narrative and the mood. And it ended up being one of my favorite pieces, and now I like it more than the original, if I can say something that's like really full of myself, right? Because I've harmonized it in a way that is more folksy. It is more of a folk melody. It's something that you would expect a couple people to be singing together while they work, or something like that, rather than something that's in some sort of sacred practice in a chapel somewhere.
Yeah. And so what happened with that is that I got the melody then, and then it was up to me to kind of come up with lyrics, because Nobilis Humilis becomes this like Latin, kind of prayer to God. And in that scene, that is actually a scene that is sung, or that song is sung by the Norns. So we have our three Norns, Urður, Virðandi, and Skuld. And so they are the harmonizers of that song. And then we have another character who's actually named Saga, and she is this oracle priestess Gyðja, who goes off on her own journey when she does join Ingilfor on this trip to Iceland. She is the oracle that is mentioned in Landnámabók, that he gives a sacrifice to, and the oracle advises him to throw the pillars into the water, the Öndvegisúlur, and that these pillars need to be thrown to the water upon first sight of land. Wherever they land on the shore, that is where you will settle. And of course, the story takes place over the course of 3 years, which is the amount of time, the 3 seasons that it took, or 3 winters, basically, that it took to find these pillars and ultimately settle Reykjavik. So Saga, the Gyðja, goes off on her own journey while Ingilfor is on his own. And she is kind of our connection to the more mythological realm. She does encounter Odin, and right before she does, we have this thing in the script where it says she walks through 4 seasons. And this song starts, and we've taken the lyrics from Voluspa. And so instead of Nobilis Humilis, it's hun fatne visikvar hon sali auti. And so it's taken directly from that. And so it allows for this kind of this connection to the source materials that we do have access to, or the original kind of poetry in the Eddas that we are familiar with now. And it implants that and kind of offers this really cool kind of stew of so many different elements, with our own creative knowledge, with Jameson's knowledge, with Matthias's ability to and just like vast, just mental capacity for so much information and ability to translate. So we've kind of, I think with another year's worth of time, this could be something like massively, huge and like a very, very well, put together thing. But we're doing this in a matter of months. Mm-hmm. And so we are kind of taking a lot of shortcuts. But it's a really fun process, and it really feels strangely accurate to just the concept of storytelling, or the concept of artistic creation of the Viking era, of people coming together and basically just offering their voice and offering their own bit of knowledge and creating something together. It feels very primal in that way.
Yeah, sounds awesome. I have a few questions that have popped up, and I have to pull us back to something that I cannot let go. Because did you say it took 3 seasons to find the logs? First of all, is the log thing is that part of the saga? Is that like a true thing that people did? They just threw a log out and let it wash ashore, and that was where they settled, Matthias?
Well, so I know that there's actually some archaeologists, I think, in Iceland who have experimented with it and tried to do that. And every time they've done it, the logs have like gone straight into the North Atlantic somewhere. Okay. That's at least the hearsay that I know about that. But it's a standard story in the saga literature, as you know, right? Like, so it's always like some guy in Norway somewhere takes his which we tend to translate to high sea pillars, but the word means something like spirit way pillar or something like that. These effigies that represent their family, their genealogic history, and their connection to the gods and all that stuff. They take that with them on the ship, and then when they come within sight of Iceland, they're supposed to take down the dragon head in the front of the boat so that they don't scare off the Landvættir, and then chuck that pillar overboard, and then go find it somewhere on the beach, because then the gods have ordained the land that you're taking. Now, the reason that story is in there is in all of this literature is because we're dealing with genealogic stories that belong to these landowners in the 13th century and 14th century. And so for them, it's an important way of authenticating their right to rule. And in that post-conversion era, this narrative about taking land that way is interpreted as they're essentially directed by God to go there. Okay. Their ancestors have just kind of misunderstood the whole thing about God, and so they worshipped some different gods, but that's okay. It doesn't matter. That we're fine, right?
Yeah.
So that's how that works, I guess.
Okay. The issue I have isn't with the logs. It's the 3 years to find said logs. Iceland's not that big. So if I'm not finding it within 6 months, I'm just settling. Not even 6 months.
And that actually factors in directly to the story.
Does it?
Yes.
Because after a couple of days, I'm like, all right, well, I'm just picking. Clearly, the log has gone into the North Sea. Like,
can I just mention something here? So, how after the Exodus from Egypt, how long are the Israelites walking around in the desert before they get to Jerusalem?
40 days and 40 nights.
I think it's a little longer than that, my friend.
40 years?
Yeah, I think that's where we're at, right?
Okay.
I love that everybody's like, I don't know, bunch of heathens. Okay, so if you go on Google Maps and you plot in the journey from let's just say Cairo to Jerusalem, you find that it takes about 7 days to walk, right? So what are we dealing with? The Israelites just like lost in Sahara somewhere? Did they go the wrong direction? No, this is of course these kinds of ways of like talking about, oh, it took so and so many winters or so and so many years, right? This is to underscore the arduousness of the journey and really let you know that they fought hard to find these pillars, right?
Yeah. See, I was thinking maybe it was just a husband who had created a second life somewhere and came back home and was like, you know what? Took us 3 years to find those pillars. I'm really sorry, love, but this is the reason why I'm back. Oh, and by the way, there's a little me as well coming along for the journey, but don't ask questions about that one.
I found him there.
Yeah, I found him. The pillar actually just morphed into a human child.
So I'm going to throw something in the group chat here. This map that I've put together of the journeys of our characters for in Saga, because you'll see that in Landnámabók it talks about how Vífill and Katli, who are two thralls that are loyal to Ingolfur, are the ones who go to find the pillars. And there are there's like artwork in Reykjavik, and like there's like a carving on a door, and I forget what building it is, but that shows like these two Irish thralls like lifting these heavily adorned beautiful totem pillars. And so I had to kind of figure out like, okay, why does it take 3 years to find them? Why did we not just get in a boat and circle around and just go search for them? What prevented this story from just kind of not taking 3 years? And so I came up with a plan. And when Vífill and Katli, they're mentioned, they start their journey west. We know where Ingolfur, well, we quote unquote know where Ingolfur landed because it's called Ingolfshöfði, or like Ingolf's head or landing. And that's in the south of Iceland. And from there, Vífill and Katli are actually sent off to the west to go search for the pillars. They come across Hjörleifur's settlement, and because Ingolfur and Hjörleifur end up parting, they don't settle in the same spot. So what Landnámabók tells us is that Ingolfur was more pious. Hjörleifur kind of did his own thing, and so he ends up settling at Hjörleifshöfði, which is just very close to Vík in South Iceland. And so Vífill and Katli are walking along, or they take their journey. They come across Hjörleifur's farm, and they see that he's been murdered. And so they have to go back to Ingolfur and tell him what is going on. And so in the story that I've written now, I have Ingolfur send them now east to go find the pillars, while he goes west to go avenge the death of his brother. And so there's also the question from these two slaves of like, can we have the boat? And he goes, no.
No.
So I've written it down where I'm like, no, you can't. I will go sail, and go bury my brother, and you will have to venture east because you can't. Yeah, like the pillars will be too difficult to be spotted from the sea because so many trees wash up on these shores. So you actually have to like go walk every square mile of the coastline and go find them. And so that's what happens in this play. And so you'll see in that map, the Vífill and Katli line, that red line goes the entire perimeter of the damn island, and they go the long way around, when in truth, if they didn't find Tierleiford dead, they could have just continued on, found the pillars a little bit quicker.
Okay.
But alas, MacGuffin narrative, things that like, bounce them away. And so I had a lot of fun trying to figure out the puzzle of how to make this story work. And that 3-year journey informs so much else of what happens, including like Ingolfor, who I play. So I'm playing Ingolfor Arnason, and so I have been, I have like kind of my fall from grace of like, the gods brought me here, why have we not found the pillars, why is it taking so long? And so we have all these kind of like little elements over the course of this time period to help further the narrative and actually make the finding that much more important and that much more of a celebration scene. And yeah, so it's pretty fun to kind of have the challenges of a lack of information and kind of make decisions from there.
Oh, that's cool. For listeners, if you want to look at the map, we will pop it on our Instagram when we post the episode for release. Yeah, I think I would have gone down a route of maybe like a Monty Python sketch of like each family finds somebody else's pillar and just like kicks it back into the seas. Like, this land's too nice for you.
This one yours? Yeah.
Like, that's not ours. And just like pushes it back into the ocean and lets it like ride around for a few months and come back somewhere else. But everyone just finds everybody else's.
Yeah. Yeah, and I was like, wow, 3 years is probably a good amount of time to like actually get it accurate to like what they used to look like if you were to carve them from the start. And so I was like, maybe if Ifit and Cutley just like sit around, start carving logs and being like, how about this one? No, that one doesn't look as good. Let's start over.
They'll never believe that one's it.
Yeah, and then they like put them in the water and then they're like, hey, here they are.
Just run out from behind. Yeah. So Jameson, one of the other things I wanted to pull back was the song. Homerus, please say it for me again.
No, Nobilis Humilis, but it's also just called the Saint Magnus hymn.
Okay, Nobilis Humilis.
Humilis, yeah.
Okay, can we just read that? If you're musical minded today, can you just read that and know what it says and play it?
How different is it to like? Right now I've got like a head cold, as you can tell. I'm not singing anything on the spot right now, but the melody itself, like if you were to go to YouTube and just do Saint Magnus hymn, like just type in Saint Magnus hymn, actually Trio Medieval, which is one of the best medieval Nordic ensembles today, they're incredible. They have a rendition of it.
I actually wasn't meaning you personally sing it right now. I was meaning like, because obviously it's the oldest hymn music. No, what did you say? Hymn music? Yeah,
so it's hymnal music, because a lot of the music from that time period that was written down was for Christian purposes.
But yeah, what I was meaning is just couldn't somebody who just reads sheet music today pick that up and look at it and go, I can just play this.
Yeah, so luckily being from the earliest music notation that people can find dates back all the way to like the 6th century. But it doesn't start becoming legible to us today until like the 900s. And so by the 12th century, it's pretty legible, and people have there's a whole type of musicologist that goes back to old Gregorian chant notation and tries to transcribe it in a way that we can read today. So yeah, you can find the sheet music to it and you can play it. It's pretty simple. It's all in an easy key. It's all, for anyone musically minded, it's all in thirds pretty much, as most of it was back then. Yeah, it's just because it was made by a monk in a Christian context. The text is in Latin, and it has a lot of musical traits to it, which does put you right back in church.
Yeah.
That's definitely a musician or a singer today could definitely read it and sing it to themselves.
That's gonna be a beautiful thing, because it's a snapshot in history it is what it is. Those notes are those notes, so you're gonna play them and they're gonna hear what they heard back then.
Yeah, that's honestly, you had me on a few weeks ago, Dan, and we talked about this a little bit, but to me, like, that's one of the beautiful things about music is like the notes might change, but no matter how much it changes, you look back at it, 1,000 years later, and it can still resonate with you, even if you are so detached from the person who wrote it or the people who would have sang it. It's still, there's just something about music that just, it makes it kind of timeless to us, as long as we can read the notation and sing it back.
Is there any of Mathias's drum and bass popping up in the play?
Honestly, it came up. It came up. I told him when they approached me, I was like, Mathias, just use your old drum and bass material. You don't need a composer. So I wish.
I tried to run it by Andy, but he was not on board.
It was a harsh no.
I'm disappointed. I would have.
It was too Danish for me. I don't know.
How is drum and bass Danish? The drum and bass, if anything, is British, right?
Yeah, I think
but
so.
The way you do it.
Yeah, he just gives it the Danish twist.
But I will say, if I can say one more thing about the music, is it's not all like repurposed old church music. Andy made it very clear to me. He was like, even if it's not like historically accurate, I do want like a Hailungi type feel to it, right? So there's a whole range in music sounds that I think actually kind of subverts any expectation of there being like one right way to make music for a time period. So like we also use the old Icelandic hymn, Her hymn Smither. My favorite is Andy, can you remind me what the name of like the unofficial Icelandic national anthem is?
Oh, Ég komin heim.
And so he gave me this old like R&B 50s take on
1960s,
yeah. Sorry, 1960s R&B.
It came out in the 60s, yeah.
To and like arrange it to fit in like this old Icelandic context. But then there are tunes that I wrote from the ground up. There was like, all right, how can I capture like a Hailungi Vardruni type sound? So there's a wide range that's like, well, if you don't think this sounds accurate, how about this on the other end of the spectrum? So we cover a lot of stylistic ranges.
We do a tvísöngur, which is like the two voices, which came into play in Iceland in, I don't know, 1600s. Something like that.
Yeah, if anything, that's going to be the most accurate of all, because Andy, you kind of mentioned early on, Icelandic music history is actually notable in the absence of instruments, just because of how valuable wood is, how valuable crafting materials are. So music was predominantly vocal in Iceland for as far back as we can understand it. But then if you factor that into doing a musical, I don't think it would be an immersive or exciting experience for all of the music to just be vocal. So like that's another middle ground you try to find.
And I think that's the thing with bands like Vardruna and Heilung. They've become so synonymous with that time period that when you're trying to put people into Iceland in the 8th century, then when you put music like that in there, it kind of automatically gives that feel to it, whether it's 100% accurate or not.
Yeah, like the biggest thing is the one of the main instruments that Andy had us writing on or playing with was the talharpa, which has 100% become synonymous with Viking music. Even though like the range of when it was introduced to Scandinavia like varies by hundreds of years, it probably wasn't the 800s, but at the same time, the Romans had bowed lyres and the Romans traded with the Nordics. So who's to say one didn't slip in? You know what I mean? So even if someone's going to say like, technically Iceland never had a talharpa or something like that, I can be like, you don't know that there wasn't at least one. You know what I mean? So it is playing with both the, again, just that thing that I'm probably beating to death at this point is finding that middle ground between, myth and like historical accuracy.
Yeah. But you have to find that beautiful spot. I don't know if you're aware, Andrew, of the wrestling show that Ed Gamester's been doing. It's a take on Ragnarok through the medium of, I guess, modern day wrestling, as in pro wrestling. They did. I think they did 30 days at the Edinburgh Fringe. I think they're doing the Fringe in Australia, in Melbourne at the minute.
Oh, amazing.
And that's just become super popular. And, he's had to take liberties with mythology because he has to put it into a wrestling setting and make it entertaining. But for me, when I've seen it, it's been an amazing, extremely entertaining show. So yeah, I guess where do you see this going? Where's the Broadway?
Oh man, I don't think at this point when I look at just modern modern Broadway, modern creativity in America, right? The stuff that gets funded, the stuff that gets money is all, it's all, market tested. Nobody takes big risks anymore. It needs to be a remake of a previous IP. Okay. Everything on Broadway right now is a musical of a movie that already existed. And
that's like movies in general, I think.
Yeah. And so we're finding ourselves in this weird cycle. And over the course of my own career, and I am from small town, Wyoming, and but here I'm this like celebrity in respect, because what I've been doing is just my own stuff, and I have directed and been in other shows that were written by other people, but my MO is just to create new work constantly. I love writing. I love coming up with new stuff. And so I've been told repeatedly, go to New York, go to LA, become famous. You have the talent. You can go do it. You can go, be the thing. But the reality of those things is just, it's ridiculous, because I would have to completely bend over backwards and get my foot in the door. And by doing so, I would have to do so many other things I don't want to do. Mm-hmm. And same goes for Broadway, right? You have to there are certain shows that will be noticed, on a small level. Let's say, the play that won the Tony, I think a year or two ago, was called A Strange Loop. I think it was created in the Midwest and Minnesota, and got recognition and ended up going to Broadway and winning the Tony. But that was a more relatable show. Our show is very esoteric and strange. And so when I think about fringe festivals, I think that's a great idea. But in truth, I would love to be able to bring this to Iceland. I would love to be able to share it with that population, because Iceland is a place that I have been going back and forth between Wyoming and Iceland, just these two places, for 10 years now. And over those years, I've lived there, I've worked there, I've created a great group of friends, but I've never had the ability to just kind of stick around and stay for various reasons. And so I want to be able to bring this show to Iceland in some respect, and not just perform it as is, because undoubtedly I've gotten a few Icelandic language things wrong. I've gotten a few details that may not be as great for the general Icelandic population. They might not love it or whatever. So I want to bring it there, and I would like to workshop it with an actual theater group in Reykjavik. I think the National Theater would be incredible. That's real high hopes, because they're the Broadway of Iceland. And they do a lot of, new and risky stuff, but sometimes good, sometimes very bad. If you heard about the Madame Butterfly debacle over there, with a bit of Asian appropriation. But in truth, I want to utilize this show, and I've written it, and Matthias can attest to this too. I've written it with a lot of weird modern Icelandic isms in it, from the old guy in the hot tub who wants to tell you about his life and become your friend.
We've all met that guy at some point.
We've all met that guy. And that scene happens in the show. We have in the very prologue, you have this old Icelandic woman and Árni Magnússon, who is born in Iceland but educated in Denmark, and she is just berating him for his Danish isms, from his accent to his loyalty to his mission, and just being so nationalist in her own heart. And we have I've, over the years of my time in Iceland, I've been able to garner so much information and so much fun culture and slang and things like that from my Icelandic friends and my experience there. So people can look at this show and say, okay, this scene takes place in the 700s, and the Icelandic woman says, "Yao, okay." Did they have okay in 1700? No, but it is the matter of mood. And so this idea of historical accuracy is actually kind of thrown out the window for the most part. It's more so an ode to history, an ode to the saga, an ode to the settlement story, and an ode to modern day Iceland. And that's why at the very end, yes, it takes place in 877, 3 years later, but they are singing, wird lugrai to flir, which is like this Icelandic thing that every fucking Icelander knows, and they love it. And it is like this song that is about, how much they love it. And it's like, look how like the bay turns to silver, and the glacier is shining, and we're home. And I'm like, this is the perfect kind of modern twist that I would like to just plug into this moment. But the difference being that we are in this historical context, and so Jameson and I have played with this song, and now it's like it's like very like I'm like Viking style, same lyrics, but like turn it into this "Y'all be that I'm coming home." And
I need everyone to understand my confusion when Andy was like, "Hey, we need to include this song in here. Here's a recording." And I hit play. First, I see the album cover, and I'm like, 60s, 50s ish.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, it's gonna be interesting. And then I hit play, and it's like a song that would be like right at home in like the Fallout radio. You know what I mean? And it's just like, Andy, how do you want me to do this? I was like, well, I'll find a way. And somehow it happened. But like, I was not expecting one of the songs that Andy really wanted him to play to be like that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It was just like that. That was one of the more interesting projects that was given. And it was just a hell of a lot of fun, but definitely way out of left field.
Yeah. Is it something that you can tour around the States? Is that
eventually, I mean, what I would love is like, I don't want to let Saga just like our shows go from October 26th through November 11th. And so we just have 3 weekends that we're doing this. And it's not something I would ever want to just like be like, okay, move on. We did the thing, go by, because
it seems like such amount of work to then just be like, oh, next thing.
Yeah. And so like as a touring company, I don't know, because I'm the executive director of my own organization now. And we're like paying rent on this dang theater.
Okay, yeah.
And so it's like, man, if we want to bring it back, we could, because now we have all the set pieces and all of that. But like, I think this is the beginning of a longer journey for Saga. I would love to. Right now, it's only 90 minutes. It's all told in one act, and so there's no actual intermission. And eventually, like with this, if this is successful, and if people really love it and enjoy it, as much as we enjoy putting it together, including my cast of 18 local actors who are learning Icelandic for me for this thing. We have our director, Dylan Hanna, who is 20 years old, and he is so capable and so intelligent, and he's taking this challenge on. So we're all kind of putting in this really fun, equal effort right now that it just makes sense that this will continue on in some way, shape, or form at some point. But I work with local actors. They all have day jobs and kids and stuff. So it's like we are not a professional theater company by any means. Yeah. So eventually, when I look at something like Fringe, those opportunities, that's like, okay, how do we either condense this show so we don't have to, pack up a Viking ship and bring it across the sea? Or, how do we kind of both condense and expand it? And I think it's just going to evolve in the same way that Saga's did over the years. So
you'll learn things from doing it. You're going to learn what works, what doesn't work. Are there any plans to live stream it in a way? I guess because it is a very niche topic. Yeah. You are going to draw in people and hopefully pull in people who don't know this topic.
Yeah, but we will record it, and so we will film the show, and we'll make it available on our website at some point. If anything, you will see clips on that we'll throw out on Instagram and things like that. We're just getting started with our kind of advertising campaign to let people know what the hell this is. So there will be opportunity to see more of this show, and we'll I'll do better at sharing more about our rehearsal process and all of that, because it's hard to do it all, but we're making it work. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I can attest to that. It's difficult to do everything, and social media it's one of the most important things, but it's also one of the things.
So it's a time suck.
Yeah, it's one of the first things to go when you're really busy and you're trying to do all these real life things it's social media is the first thing to just be like, oh, I'll post tomorrow. I'll film that tomorrow. And then tomorrow there's another list of things you have to do. But yeah, so is there anything we've missed before we jump on and do a Q&A after? Is there anything that you feel?
I do want to mention that in that first weekend, Matthias and Jameson will be coming up to Jackson from Boulder.
Awesome.
And they'll be doing lectures that are related to our production. And so we have like this whole opening weekend is going to be very fun. And so if you guys want to talk about what you will be talking about that weekend, maybe we can include that.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to be giving a little bit of a historical background to the settling of Iceland. Also got some posters and stuff that's going to be up in the foyer at the theater about the history of Iceland, about Ari Thorkelsson writing all this stuff, and what else is there in there? Connecting Vikings and like North America in different ways, like how Vikings have played a role in North American culture, and a couple of other things. Yeah. So if you
volcanoes.
Not so much the volcanoes, like
a little bit tattoos.
tattooed
volcanoes.
Yeah, tattooed in a live volcano.
Yes, it's gonna be some of that as well. Yeah.
Jameson, what are you going to be talking about?
In a wild surprise turn of events, I'm going to be talking about Viking music. So, with a particular emphasis on Iceland, because. Honestly, it's interesting because when people talk about Vikings, like the history of it, there's a lot of focus on Iceland. When people talk about Viking music, that's when the focus shifts towards Norway, in particular. And it's very different. Music developed very differently in both places. I already touched on the lack of instruments, but yes, that'll be fun to give the historical context before I then show people how I'm breaking the historical context in the music I wrote. So that's gonna be an interesting little experiment.
Yeah, it'll be fun. Perfect. Yeah, let's jump over and do a little Q&A and let people ask you guys some questions. If you want to listen to the Q&A, you get it on our Patreon. Like again, I said at the start of the show, it's £3 a month and helps us keep everything going, keep producing the show, and just hopefully getting better and better quality as we go along. Do you all want to shout out where people can follow you? I'll let you go first, Andrew, where people can find the show, find you. Follow the Instagram that you're now going to be posting the rehearsals on.
So our Instagram is Tumbleweed Creative Arts. So at Tumbleweed Creative Arts. And that is our kind of where we're going to be posting a lot about our show and all future shows. And then my Instagram is at Munz of Steel, MUNZ of Steel. And then our website is www.tcajh.org.
Perfect. Jameson, you go next. We'll let Matthias win because he deleted his Facebook and everything.
Yeah. Well, you guys can find me on Facebook, Jameson Foster. There's not many of us, but then you can find me on Instagram at Nordic Sound Channel. Follow the Nordic music platform that I run.
Perfect. Matthias.
Well, I mean, you can always go to my website, MathiasNordvig.com, MathiasNordvig.com, and see stuff that I do there. Listen to my podcast, The Sacred Flame, if you feel like it. You can find me on Instagram as well by putting in my name, MathiasNordvig, Mathias Nordvig. And then you can follow me there and see the pictures that I put up of my wood stacks. And
I recently got a wood burning stove.
Yeah,
I'm one of you now. I'm converted. I got a wood store. I've been stacking it all neatly. It's gripped me. It's fun.
It's amazing. I love it. I still have a huge pile of chopped wood up the hill over here that I need to run down to where we're going to need it. So fun things. And it was actually kind of snowing a little bit the other day already.
Oh,
So
yeah. Best winter of the season.
Yeah. So
I do have to say, it does feel like every time I go up to Matthias's place, he has like just finished playing with wood in some capacity. And I feel like every time he's like, "Hey, do you want to come see my wood?" And I'm like, "Well, it's not worded that way, but yeah."
And on that note, we're finished. Matthias, we need to book you in to come back on soon as well, and we can have a chat and have a nice catch up. And
yeah, I would love that.
It's been a little while.
We
will book that. Perfect. Well, thank you very much. And I can't wait to see the show. Hopefully one day I get to see it live, but I'll definitely watch the recording. Unless I suddenly get tons of money from people signing up to Patreon/Nordic Mythology podcast, and I can just fly out there and watch it. That would be nice. So
that'd be great. Yeah.
Everybody sponsor his tickets.
Yeah, people want to do that. I'm not going to complain.
I mean, hey, if you can fly here, you'll have a free ticket to the show. So
there we go. Well, hopefully, maybe people feel generous.
Yeah.
But all right. Thank you very much.